up in my headphones, Charles?
Turning it up. Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan. And Dylan, before we get started, I gotta say you're sounding pretty good today.
Oh, thank you, Charles. Yes, for any listeners who notice a difference today in the sound quality on my end, hopefully an improvement in the sound quality on my end, I have finally, after Charles has been urging me for a long time, gotten a mic instead of using my gaming headset. And yeah, hopefully I'm coming in crystal clear here. Charles is in charge of all the audio stuff and all that, and I'm hoping to make his life a little bit easier, and your lives, listeners, because I'm sure my gaming headset was not coming in as well as Charles's awesome mic. So yeah, well, I'm excited.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan, for upgrading the setup. We are really excited I'm excited to listen to this one and hear how it comes out. But so far, you're sounding good. And you know, Dylan, I couldn't think of a better way to celebrate your new microphone setup than with a fun, rousing edition of Friends Creating Fantasy, which is a series that we've done 4 times now, 3 times, where we randomly generate a book title, a protagonist, and an antagonist, and we use that to outline a fantasy story.
That is exactly what we do in Friends Creating Fantasy. And yeah, I'm super excited. It's basically to try to come up with that outline, a general beginning, middle, end of a fantasy novel based on all these random tropes and roles and title nouns thrown our way, and these usually get pretty zany and silly and hopefully fun. And I'm really excited to
improvised.
Oh yes, completely improvised.
It feels weird going into an episode without any notes or having read anything or anything like that. But you know what, Dylan? I think we've been, as fantasy fans, preparing for this for our whole lives. So
I like to think so.
So let's get into it. Let's start with generating a title. We have curated a long list of very common nouns you find in book titles, things like daggers, dragon, storm, blade, shadow. And Dylan's going to randomly generate one. I'm going to randomly generate the other. And through that, we will create the title. So, Dylan, do the honors. What is the first name that we have here?
All right, let's get this random generator pumping. Beep, boop, beep. Oh, we've got throne here, Charles. Throne.
Okay. Throne. Well, I've got
Let's not get game.
Very... I know. We got something close.
Please don't say you got game.
No. I got empire.
Ooh.
Empire and throne.
Ooh, that's a weird one.
A Empire of Thrones?
I mean, well, it has me thinking of friend of the show Mark Lawrence's Emperor of Thorns. But I mean, I guess that's different, but just sounds very similar.
I mean, we could do something very
going here.
Simple.
I don't know. Maybe this is like the throne, the Empire Throne, or like the Empire Throne, something like that.
Yeah, the Empire Throne, or the Throne of the Empire could be.
Sure. Let's keep those in mind and generate protagonist, antagonist stuff, and see if any of those start to stick out once we have more information here. Does that sound good, Charles?
That sounds great, Dylan. So what we're going to do now is we're going to randomly generate our protagonist. So Dylan has all of the types of roles that this character could be. He's got things like king, queen, different races, all of things like that. And I have tropes that are very common in fantasy characters like anti-heroes, orphans, snarky, berserker, things like that. So why don't you go ahead, Dylan, and let us know who is our protagonist?
Sure thing. And just clarifying that those races are fantasy races like elf, dwarf, and halfling and things like that.
Yeah.
So let's get that generator pumping. Beep, boop, beep. We do have a knight here, Charles. We've done knights before, I think, but they're pretty flexible. So I'm open to going again, but usually, so far, we've always let the generator just speak for itself. What do you think, Charles?
Well, let's have the generator speak for itself for now, because my trope type is very different from last time. This time, we have the edgelord knight.
Oh, no. An edgelord knight. And I guess this is probably the protagonist. That's what we generate first, right?
That's what we decided. So an edgelord protagonist.
An edgelord knight. I mean, it's basically like Anakin, you could say, is an edgelord knight because he's a Jedi knight, right?
Yeah, exactly. Anakin is a good example.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so that is promising. But before we make any decisions, let's just crank that antagonist out. Who is our edgelord knight going up against?
All right. Beep, boop, beep. A princess. We've got a princess for an antagonist here.
And I picked a very appropriate trope, corrupt.
Corrupt princess against an
edgelord
knight. And I guess our edgelord knight is the This is interesting, Charles. Yeah. And I know I just recently, as you know, watched episode 2 of Star Wars for an upcoming feature that I'm going to have on your other podcast, Roger podcast, with our other lifelong friend, Derek. So if you're a Star Wars fan, definitely check that one out. And yeah, it's hard not to already be thinking that we could have some fun with this Anakin edgelord knight protag, and then having, I don't know, Padme's going through the brain here, Charles, for this royalty, but what about a corrupt, more complex Padme type in that antagonist role? And we can even play with this, like, I guess, enemies to lovers trope as a possibility and kind of see where that goes. I'm open to love. But that's what's coming to mind immediately, Charles. What's going through your head?
I'm thinking let's follow that. I'm coming back to like trying to close in on this title. If we're going like generic fantasy book title, The Throne of the Empire, to me, has the ring.
Oh, yeah, and there's an empire, Charles.
Exactly. And thrones and empires and princesses and knights. We're in it. We are in it.
Oh, yeah.
The fantasy generator Charles has served it up.
Yeah. Okay, Charles, are you open to, on Friends Talking Fantasy? I know it's Friends Talking Fantasy, but are you open to the idea of space opera, or if we're trying to stay close to Friends Talking Fantasy here, space fantasy, which is something that people have referred to Star Wars as before? Are you open to those ideas?
Yeah, of course. We've read Murderbot. We can do this.
Yeah. Yes. Friends creating space fantasy. That's what we're dealing with today.
And space fantasy, that's very exciting. So we have a space edgelord knight, which sounds pretty cool, and we have a space corrupt princess.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I like the thing is there's so much potential, there's so much open. Sometimes with the Friends Creating Fantasy generator, it forces you down a path where you have to have the story make sense for these zany characters, but these are such common character tropes and roles that we are kind of free to roam narrative wise. Let's go down this line, because Anakin is obviously such an influence for our edgelord space knight, that let's take that trope of that character, make him the protagonist, and throw him in a story where there's obviously, I'm guessing, some sort of contention for a throne, for an empire, and we've got a princess
which may be held by the princess who's corrupt.
Or the princess's family, parents, however that
Yes.
works, because if they were an emperor, right, or an empress instead of a princess, so there's that to consider. But basically, I see there's some sort of power vacuum or power struggle, and the knight is somehow wound up in the middle of it, and has a pretty big effect on this. So how are we gonna? What's the conflict here?
So you're thinking about a power vacuum sort of situation, Charles? Can
Yeah.
you tell me more about that?
Right. Well, it's almost kind of like Game of Thrones in a sense that the king is the one who sat on the throne is dead, and now all these families are have different claims to it and are trying to fill that vacuum. And if we wanted to do it that way, then we could have this intergalactic empire, right? And someone's got to sit on that, fill
Throne.
that role, and she could be actually trying to be the empress, and she is going, or maybe she is corrupt and is trying to kill her parents, because she's corrupt. She's planning an assassination on her family, on whoever the current emperor or empress is.
Ooh, Charles, which
very
means
corrupt.
that yes, which means that it's possible that our edgelord Jedi Knight equivalent, or Space Knight, I guess, Charles, you probably understand. It's fair for us to basically call him a Jedi equivalent, right? I guess a Space Knight, we'll say.
Yeah.
He could be working for the family, so it could be very tight quarters in that sort of royal palace type situation where he is potentially even trying to, and I guess honestly I gravitated towards saying he because I'm thinking about this Anakin type. I think we could gender flip Anakin potentially if we were interested in that, but if we want to play it more the typical Anakin type, we'll go he.
Okay.
And which I'm open to whatever, spin it through your head and see what comes out, Charles.
Mm-hmm.
And right now I'm thinking, though, typical Anakin type, and maybe it's like us trying to suss out the conspiracy in this more closed quarters palace. It happens to be in space. He happens to have a laser sword that happens to be making sounds like lightsabers.
No, I
all
like
this
it.
stuff, right? But
so
it's like a mystery trying to suss
also,
it out. Yeah.
But there's that piece, but here's the other piece, because I'm going back. I want to make this idea of the edgelord. Like, how do we make an edgelord characteristic part of the plot? And here's what I'm thinking. Being an edgelord and being corrupt, they're close. What I'm thinking is, what if, okay, this knight is such an edgelord that, they're indulging in these fantasies with the princess, like, oh, you should kill your parents. That'd be super cool. Like that kind of edginess. And then the princess starts to starts to do it. And the knight's like, oh, wait, well, I don't know if I actually want to act on these things, or maybe it's not that, but I think this idea of his edgelordiness is basically being tested, and to the point where it's like, okay, now I'm actually being the straight-laced hero in this because I'm doing what I think is right. I think there's a theme in there somewhere. I'm trying to weed out the theme in that.
No, I see it.
Yeah. Okay.
This has me thinking of some things that might be interesting. So first off, I like the idea of the trying to subvert some of these things of the way that at least my read on the prequels has a lot of these ways in which Anakin was emotionally repressed in a way that led him astray, and that came from the Jedi Knight Order and the way that they treat him. And he kind of had these impulses that he didn't have any place to put them, and that's part of, I don't know what we can do Star Wars potential spoiler stuff here, Charles, what I can say about him. But I'll just say he had a lot of impulses they didn't know where to put, like emotional impulses and these edgelord characteristics. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if some of that repression of our edgelord knight in this story is what's leading him to kind of just like throw it out as these whims with this princess, just kind of airing grievances. Like, I want to kill the Jedi Order equivalent. I want to kill the Empire for condoning all this BS. I want to do all these things. And he's already kind of there, but it's more him just trying to vent. And she could even start as this very like Padme was
what if it was
like,
Padme and
like
here, Dylan, wait a second.
yeah, like trying
what
to
if
help.
we take the Padme character and we take the Sidious character and combine them into one person? So here's the deal. Here's the premise, right? The book starts, there is a big war, intergalactic war going on, and this edgelord knight was assigned as a bodyguard to the princess, right? And then as they're spending time together, the princess is actually trying to puppet master a situation to create a power vacuum to sit in as the emperor, and she's kind of using this edgelordiness of the knight to get there, along those paths.
This is an option that I think we could go with, and we could tell something, or we could outline something interesting out of it. Here's where I'm coming from right now is I kind of want this like Padme Sidious type to start out coming from a place of genuine care. And I think if they're, like, I just like you know this, Charles. I like antagonists and villains that think they're being heroes and that are coming from a place of actually trying their best. They just go astray. And I wonder if this corrupt princess character is hearing all these things, and while Anakin's way of trying to, or not Anakin, our Anakin equivalent's way of trying to channel these things is like, I want to kill everyone, I want to, like, I'm an edgelord, that kind of stuff, is a little bit misplaced as a way to deal with these problems. He is making legitimate points about issues with the current ruling class, with the Empire, and this princess's like parents, assuming they are the emperors, and also with the Jedi Order equivalent in our world here. Like, there are legitimate problems that are being expressed, and because the princess is someone who cares a lot about and is potentially in love with, even at the start of the story maybe, is in love with our Anakin type, then she's legitimately like, wait, this is really messed up, and I have some power to try to make this better. And she's only the antagonist because that desire starts leading her down this route, like you mentioned, of acting on these edgelord tendencies that the Anakin equivalent was expressing in his like repressed anger. And I kind of like, too, we can flip this. I talked about doing what is it? Enemies to lovers. We can flip it and make it lovers to enemies. Start as lovers and then have them end up by the end of it enemies.
Yes, I do like that. And I think that the strength of having an edgelord character and a corrupt character is that they would have some synergy at the beginning, but then there's a very distinct difference between the two. Like, one is just like edgy because like whatever, I hate sand, and then the other one is like I'm going to kill people and take over, or maybe it's I'm going to like run an illegal business or something like that. Or like steal money from my parents or something. She doesn't necessarily have to be gunning for the throne. It's just because our book is called The Throne of the Empire that we have to do. Yeah, we have to make it relevant. Although
I think it's good if she guns for the throne. And maybe I kind of like, Charles, we usually try to tell standalones. Maybe in this time we can try to tell. I kind of like the idea of a story that might end with our corrupt princess taking the throne and leading us taking the throne, positioning herself against our protagonist and anyone else that is on our protagonist's side here, and then setting the stage for a book 2, which we'll probably never outline or have anything to do with, that would involve the actual now conflict between the Jedi Knight equivalent order led by our edgelord protagonist, who maybe even learned a lesson about like, oh, okay, well, like maybe I was going too far because when someone acted on these things, it got really messed up. Yeah. And then he's able to take a leadership position by the end in this Jedi Order equivalent, and it sets the stage for a book 2 that is like, we've gone from lovers to enemies, and we're both in charge of our own respective units, like the Jedi Order equivalent versus the Empire, led by this corrupt princess who by the end of it is a corrupt empress. And yeah, book 2 is where that clash happens. So book 1 is the story of lovers to enemies.
Yeah, no, I think that is a terrific idea. I love the lovers to enemies plot line, and I like this idea of where we end where the stage is set, where maybe the corrupt princess becomes the corrupt empress, and the edgelord knight becomes the maybe not as edgy general. That's where I'm winding up on this one, and yeah, I think that's a really good idea. If we're following the kind of, I guess, inspiration of Star Wars, we could have it where it's like I said a little bit earlier, Anakin was assigned as a bodyguard for Padme, so maybe we can have a similar situation, and they have these regular meetings or it starts as one guarding the other, and then they start to break down that like social barrier and start to get to know each other more and have conversations and break protocol, and it's confusing and it's tricky, but there's some intrigue there, and yeah, I think this has a lot of legs. It's exciting.
Yeah, I think so too, Charles. And the way I'd want to do it, because that sounds a lot like how Anakin and Padme met in or not met, but ended up by episode 2, and this kind of Anakin was guarding Padme, and they, I have some opinions I won't get into about how that relationship develops and how it doesn't make sense, but also, and I don't know, I think it's like, I'd like to start after all that's already happened, because it's like we've seen that already, those kind of things. Like we could even start with them, like, because the story isn't about how they become lovers. The story is about how they went from being lovers to, by the end, enemies. So it could even start with like they're lying in bed together and he's venting, like that's like the beginning of the book, and it's like yeah, no, he's like, I hate stone, just so we don't get sued.
Oh, that's true. We don't want to invite. Yes. We don't want to like copy. I hate rocks.
Yes.
We're in space.
I hate dirt.
Rocks have no business in space. Ooh, dirt. That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I hate dirt. All right. Yeah. So sounds like we have it. Yeah, I would say we kind of have our ending, which is this. Assuming you're on the same page here, Charles. Our ending is this: set the stage for book 2 with this. We've officially gone from lovers to enemies, and we are going to have our Anakin equivalent protagonist at the head of this, like you said, general of this Jedi Order equivalent, and we're going to have the Padme equivalent corrupt princess character,
or maybe not general. Maybe they can just even be but yeah, that's basically right. Like this leadership role in the military of the opposing side, and versus the new empress who is totally corrupt, which is interesting.
Yeah. To get there, we need a couple things that I'm seeing here. We need to figure out how the princess is able to, I guess we have to figure out how the princess starts wanting to take over the throne, which sounds like has a decent amount of like trying to act on these impulses of the edgelord. We have to figure out how then the princess successfully does, I guess, kill her parents, which is pretty savage, but these things happen in books. And then from there, I guess we have to figure out how our edgelord hero learns a lesson about being less edgy and trying to do the right thing even though it's too late for the corrupt now empress to learn that lesson, at least our edgelord protagonist can apply that lesson in book 2 toward fighting against our corrupt empress. So we have to
Right.
figure out, how does he learn that lesson?
Right. Okay. Here's what I'm thinking. So it's all coming back to being a knight. You're part of an order of, much like the Jedi Order, right? Let's just keep following this parallel here.
Sure.
And there's a lot of things that, if those that listen to Roger, we've talked about, like, there's a lot of
This
mistakes
whole
with the
thing.
order that's not being talked about, right? So we can talk about them here in the Throne of the Empire, where you have this order, and it's like, oh, my order sucks, like they're not cool like me,
Yes.
this very edgelordy thing. It's like, I do my
Yeah.
own thing, like I wouldn't play their politics, I'm too cool. And then the princess is like, yeah, you like, there are a lot of problems with them. They're repressed, they're too
Yeah.
focused on politics, they've lost their way, they're not communicating with each other, they're like
Right.
separating themselves from society, they have too much power and like unchecked
Mm-hmm.
like authority, blah blah blah. And he's like,
Yep.
they should, like, they're not cool, so that's kind of how this can get started, right there, because
For
it should be
sure.
started from somewhere
That's the
that's
opening
like,
scene.
right. And that's also like an actual genuine conflict where it's like, they're both right, kind of a thing. So it
Yeah.
would be cool to explore that idea. And then what I'm thinking is, I'm thinking this knight character, as they keep checking in on the princess over time, they're noticing things like, oh, she's just getting back from talking to somebody. That's weird. And oh, she's doing this and that. And then I think there's almost like this horror movie moment, right? Or like a thriller movie moment where she starts to reveal more and more of her intent. And he's like, the knight character starting to get scared. And then there's this horrific moment where the princess actually executes her own parents, right? And that's kind of the deal breaker, I would say. Like, that's where I'm going. I don't know what you think.
Okay. So, yeah, then we need moments that would come out of nowhere if we didn't have moments building toward it, where it was like these middle ground things where our edgelord protagonist is like, okay, that was a little bit much, but I still love you, and sometimes you gotta do it, like you gotta be a little bit more brutal because my mentor never let me do that. Those kind of moments have to happen that are more in the middle of this thing before it just comes out of nowhere that she's like, oh yeah, I've been listening to you and been empathetic, and I started to think, you know what, I should kill my parents. Like, it needs to be built toward a little bit more. I think we can get that moment, but we it's going to be a little bit like sooner. Sorry, it's going to be later than some other moments that are more subtle.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm all for that. And we can weave it into these moments. Well, we can set up some kind of premise, whether it's um, discussions about politics, or maybe the princess is getting slighted repeatedly. Uh, I'm not sure, but I don't think there's any wrong answer here. We can just throw something out there and see what sticks.
Sure. Well, what if there's a moment, because it has to be, it's like, okay, you went far, but I'm not sure if you went too far. So what if there's some sort of third character in here that is a pretty bad person, like is totally caught up in all these politics things, but in a power hungry and even Machiavellian way, and that person is actually just doing really messed up things, and maybe is even like the epitome of the problems that the edgelord has been venting about. And they're going around, this third character, is going around kind of like a Mace Windu type, is going around the palace, but worse than Mace Windu, like a worse person than Mace Windu was, and just trying to seek their own power and abuse the system, using all of these awful things that our protagonist is pissed about. And maybe she does something, the princess, after hearing a lot of venting about the Jedi Order equivalent and all this kind of stuff, maybe she initiates something where he gets killed, or if not killed, then like disappears, and our protagonist is like, wait, what happened to that guy? And it's or maybe has been killed, but just to keep this
because
kind of,
this is great. No, I like where you're going. And let me say one thing, because we had
Yeah.
talked about this idea of like acting on your impulses. It's like being edgelordy, you can have these kind of impulses, but then he's not acting on them. But who is? This corrupt princess is like, I heard
Yeah.
you, and now I'm gonna go do it. And it's like, we don't just.
That's what I think the whole point is.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, we don't just do whatever, like we just kill people because we had a bad day or because we had an argument or something. Like, this is a bit too crazy. And then it's like, well, you're with me or against me, and then that's kind of where where we go. So basically, yeah, we get these moments where it's like, oh, this character's lost their way, they're not cool, whatever, and
Well, I think it's got to be more intense than they're not cool. It's got to be like, no, I mean, I think that this is how it happens, is the edgelord is like, I just wish someone would kill this person because the world would be so much better without them. And he might be, and I think that's the thing. If that person were to die, the world might be better. Like, that's how bad a person this person is. But it's not right to kill people because that's the case, because killing people is bad. And right, so but that's what the edgelord kind of learns along this way, is like, oh, I was venting and those things I was saying were kind of true technically, but if like maybe I need to be more careful about the things that I'm saying and what I'm venting, because like, even if they're true, acting on them, like you were saying before, Charles, and like we've been circling around for a while, act on them even if they're true is a messed up thing to do. And it's almost like I want it to be his fault that the princess gets corrupt, and that the princess starts taking these more Machiavellian actions, because she really cares about him and sees the ways in which he's being harmed by I think this third character is like we talked about bridges between pillars in our Lord of the Rings recommendation episode, Charles.
Oh, we did.
And I think that the bridge here between her killing her family and her being a relatively normal, if not with slight Machiavellian tendencies, person at the start, is that she legitimately believes, and is probably right, that this third Mace Windu but worse equivalent guy, maybe even Count, what was that guy? Count Dooku or something?
Yeah, that was a
that
guy.
kind of guy. But wasn't his thing that he was like doing all this politicking and being a messed up dude and things like that?
Yeah, he was a former Jedi that defected to the Sith, and was like, his argument was that the Jedi's lost their way, this, that, the other thing. So now I'm on this side, So
Okay, not that argument. Because I think this is more than the Mace Windu type, who's like all in on that sort of Jedi should be politicians was kind of his thing, right?
Yeah, they were kind of. I don't know if they thought that, but they were definitely so wrapped up in the politics for sure. Mace Windu and Yoda were the two biggest guilty parties in that. So yeah, I think that's great, and it's where they're happening, but it's not revealed that it's the princess doing them at first.
Yes.
And
yes,
then you have, and it's basically all at the suggestion of this edgelord knight, right? And it keeps happening, and it keeps happening, and I think at some
Charles.
point, yeah, go ahead.
So what if? So I like this idea you were just talking about with he doesn't know it's the princess.
Mm-hmm.
He just these things start happening. Like I like the idea that even if the this villainous gone too far with politics character, I like the idea of maybe he's killed, but at first he just disappears, and that's like you said, Charles, a way to make it not clear that the princess is going around like acting on his impulses.
Mm-hmm.
And what if so that means that our protag needs to have some sort of reason why he thinks these things are happening when he's venting them. So what if our protag, because he's a chosen one, that's kind of the Anakin stuff too, what if our protag is convinced that his chosen one status gives him some sort of like divine ability where he just has to like speak things into the world and then they start happening. So he's like, I wish this guy would just disappear and just be gone. And then he is. And it's like, wow, my chosen one abilities did that. And it's just the princess acting on all of this behind his back. And he's kind of grappling in the foreground. Like we are in his point of view. So we also don't know when we're reading this that the princess is acting it out unless we're starting to suss it out.
Mm-hmm.
But the princess seems very empathetic and caring for our protagonist. So maybe we don't think that that's happening. And we're tricked by this narrative of our protagonist who thinks that, yeah, just their chosen one status is allowing them to just like wish things into the world with his venting that then take place. And he's on his own starting to grapple with the morality of like, wait, what should I breathe into the world? Like, what statement should I say? And that's kind of how we're starting to learn this lesson. And then it's a twist at the end that's like, no, it wasn't your chosen one status doing that. It was the princess you were telling everything because you're in a relationship with her and you vent to her. And then she tries to help you because she cares about you. And you need to stop being an edgelord.
Yeah, I think we can. My concern is that you got to do it in a way that's not like too silly, because I feel like this book would become very, very serious. So to be like, oh, it's my chosen one status that's doing all this, we have to frame it in a way where it's a bit more serious and not so much like, isn't this character silly for thinking this kind of a thing? But I like it. I think it's got legs.
Yeah, and the way that we'd potentially be able to do that is to wrap it up in some sort of prophecies that could be wrong or misinterpreted about like, no, the chosen one actually can do this in some way, like some sort of misinterpretation of like a line that says like what the chosen one believes will be or something like that, or or what the chosen one demands will be. And it's like justified from the perspective of a character who is like in a world where prophecies are real and chosen ones are real. That's like, okay, well, then maybe I actually can just wish things into existence, and we don't feel like he's being a bozo for thinking, and we feel like he's just reacting to the world that he's in, which is strange. But so are these chosen one worlds are strange, and we accept them in things like Star Wars and Wheel of Time because we're in that world.
I'm a fan. I think we've got a very promising first draft for a book, and I don't know. I love this idea of this corrupt princess like twist reveal horror thriller moment, and I don't know. I think we're ready to bring it home.
Okay, I kind of want. Yeah, I'm willing to bring it home. I think part of bringing it home will be I want us to vaguely say that there's one other event that happens, kind of like end of Act 1 event is like an even subtler version of. It's like, I guess it's that these sort of demands and vents of the protagonist are escalating slowly. Yeah. So we need more smaller moments in between, but the two big moments are that the like villainous third character disappears and is stumbled, like he probably finds that character toward the end, like dead. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh my God, like mutilated and dead. Like that's another thriller horror moment. It's like, I thought he just disappeared into the universe and he got wrecked. Like stumbles upon this mutilated body. And then the final moment is that the princess kills her own parents in order to take the throne and enact her own stuff on the world. But there has to be these other smaller moments building up toward those two bigger moments. And I think it's like end of act 2 is the like villainous character disappears. And there needs to be like an end of act 1 sort of moment, but we don't need to have that figured out. We're just coming up with an outline. So I want to give across the idea that there would be some sort of like subtle building of the extremeness of these edgelord wishes that are enacted.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need to figure out like, okay, what's the kind of stuff that what's the kind of attitude that an edgelord knight would have, and how can we like scale up the crimes, the war crime being committed to the point where we get some sort of like graphic murder. And like this, it's like you don't realize you're in a thriller movie until in a thriller book until towards the end. Like this book is at the beginning reads like a space opera romance, like that chosen one kind of thing, and then it's like, oh, you don't realize the kind of story that you're in. This is a thriller with a twist, and that is the payoff of this book. So it has to be these convincing like epic fantasy trope moment things where it's like, oh, like what if it was like they're in love, right? And it's like, oh, I'm being called to an assignment, but I hate that guy and I don't want to go on that assignment, you know? And then it's like, oh, you're, you know, like it starts that way. And then it's like,
well, what if it starts with just the assignment
anymore.
Gets canceled?
Yeah, exactly. So the assignment
it's like, okay,
gets canceled.
That's not a big deal.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, that's you know, that's cool. You don't even think, you think that that's just a coincidence and it's just a thing that happens on the side. And then it's like, okay, oh, that person is like talking to me in private now and is trying to get me to do stuff, and they're annoying and they don't understand what it means to be a knight and this, that, and that, and then that person disappears. And it's like, oh,
well, I want it to be worse. I want that person to be worse. I want them to actually be like a messed up, villainous person, and I want it to be venting at the level of like I wish you were dead, or I wish you were just gone.
And that's good. And then they but I like that they disappear.
Yes.
And then no one knows where they are. And it's like, who cares where he is? I'm glad he's gone or whatever, you know, like that kind of edgelordy thing. But then, like you had described earlier.
And he's saying all this to the princess, like lying in bed or like hanging out on a date.
Yeah. And then, then it's like what you said. It's the in that horror moment reveal where you find out that it was like a graphic murder. And then there's another and then it's like, this is what like there's ways to like take control over these things. Like, I can do these things for you. I can give you the power that you want to be in that leadership position. Like all that temptation, right, is how the princess kind of reveals herself to him. And then he's like, he rejects her. And then that's like where this book ends, because now it's like, I did all this for you and you rejected me, and now
I love it.
Yeah, exactly. Now,
I love that. I love the final confrontation where it's like he finds the dead third villainous character that disappeared. The protagonist does. Then the protagonist is like, what the, like, oh, and then he's starting to connect the dots that it might be the princess.
And then the princess is like,
the princess and confront her, and she's standing in front of like her dead parents, and she's like, I did everything you asked, like I listened to you, I was the only one who cared about you, and everything that you wanted is now a reality. Now we can be together and we can rule.
Yeah, I like that, but I want it to be a little more calculated and a little less like, I don't want it to seem like there's like this manic hysteria in the moment.
No.
I want it to be, but here's what I'm thinking. I think, right? Like there's this moment in Star Wars that's very famous. It's like, did you ever hear of Darth Plagueis the Wise, right? Where he's floating these ideas to Anakin that there's other powers out there that aren't the Jedi powers that could have him, you know, keep his loved ones alive and stuff like that. So I'm thinking like she's trying to float these ideas like, you know, there's like ways that you could, you know, maybe you should be the one that's like in charge or whatever, you know. It's like there's certain like powers or methods or whatever that you could use to take control. And then he's like, hey, I don't know, it's it's tempting, and like we should totally do that, or something like that. And then there's, I'm trying to think of like, I don't know if they're like standing over their dead parents or if it's something
I
like,
kind of, yeah.
because I
don't
kind
know.
of like this princess character to be like cold and calculated, so.
Yeah, but do you?
And I don't know if she's
I
actually
mean,
the
I
one
think
that.
you can stand over dead, or you think she like ordered the parents dead?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that like standing over the dead parents does seem kind of melodramatic, sure, but I think there's a way. It's all in the context of how you do it. It could be this like very, especially if the character has been built to be this more like.
I mean, it
I
could
don't
be
know if
they're killed
calculate. I
in
think
the
she should.
room,
I
but
think
not by her, right? Like they're having like a family dinner or something, and then like the princess says something or does something, and all of a sudden like they get killed, whether it's being strangled or stabbed or whatever. But I don't know, maybe something like that, because
sure
I do want
maybe
it to be horrific. And so that means it would have to either happen or would have to have some horrible implications. And
okay.
so.
I got it.
Mhm.
Here's what I'm thinking. You let me know what you think, Charles. Because
Got it.
I like this idea. I think you're making a lot of sense, and you don't want it to be this like emotional, like, well, it's fine for it to be emotional, but you don't want it to be this like she went quote unquote crazy. You want it to be that she was actually trying to do what she thought was right from a logical
Right. And
perspective.
she's trying to
And
convert the knight too.
yes, so I think, yeah, and we want it to also be that the everything she does, there's a point. Like there's a point that the emperors were bad. Her parents were
Hmm.
bad at being emperors. Like, but you don't kill people just because they're bad at their job,
Hmm.
and those kind of things. So
Yeah.
it's very Machiavellian, but she does want to do this for the greater good, and maybe it comes more from that place. Coupled with, of course, caring about our edgelord protagonist, but not exclusive to that, and not like we don't want to play into these like backwards, like crazy ex-girlfriend type tropes or anything like that. We want her to be making moves that, though we don't agree with them at all, they make sense from this more detached, cold, logical perspective of, yeah, Machiavellianism, like trying to do an ends justifies the means move. And maybe she does make the world overall, like maybe she has a chance to make the world overall a better place, but killing people isn't the way to do it. So it's like, I do like this idea you were talking about of her ordering her parents killed, and maybe the protagonist at that point is in a place of like someone's killing people, and I don't know exactly what's going on, and he realizes
What if
somehow
it's
that
like,
yeah,
what if the princess invites like him somewhere to like a meeting or something, or like, oh, meet me here, and then it's like, why are we here? It's like, oh, I want you to see something. And then
yeah,
that's when the murder is
they're like behind a
orchestrated, whether
glass
they're
door
either
that he can't
or
get
on a
through.
balcony or in a
Yeah,
spaceship
sure,
or something.
whatever, just can't get
Yeah.
through, can't save them in
And then
time.
it's like, what have you done? It's like,
Or like a video, it could be a
yeah,
video feed,
yeah, it could be a
like
video feed,
yeah,
and where
she's
she's
just
kind
showing
of,
him, it's like this is happening
she's
far away.
yeah, she's giving like the Plagueis the Wise speech, and as she's doing it, it's like, what are we looking at? And then it becomes this realization that, oh, she's actually trying to convince me to overthrow the order that I'm a part of, and she's already gone and orchestrated the murder of her parents, and there's nothing I can do to
So
stop that, and this is all shifted.
yeah, and I think tied into this has to be that somehow like the way that the emperors have been corrupt is that kind of this Jedi order has taken control of them in some way, because those
Mhm.
have to be connected.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this whole thing was
Look, I overthrow my parents, you overthrow
yes,
your
you overthrow,
bosses,
yeah,
and
right,
we got it all. And he's like, I'm not
exactly. So
overthrowing my bosses. There's a difference between hating my boss and then murdering them. It's like,
yes,
so.
exactly. So yeah, I think that's kind of how it goes, and she like I do like the idea of her coming from this more Machiavellian is a lot better than pragmatic here, but this place of trying to convey with logic. You had lots of points when you were venting like an edgelord. Of course, they were conveyed in these annoying edgelordy ways, but I listened to all of that. I thought about it. I considered what kind of power I might have to make the world better. And you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Yeah. That's what the princess is saying. Yeah. And the edgelord is like, I've gone too far. Like, clearly I have gone off the deep end, and I brought her with me. And she's like, no, like,
and he's realizing all these people that are dead now, and like
are
all
his fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
And her going this awry is in a lot of ways his fault too, and that does because this is the first in potentially a trilogy or a duology, who knows. It sets a stage where this final conflict, maybe like she can't kill him though because she still loves him. Yeah. And little much, but come on, right? Why not? I think if it's played the right way, and clearly this is someone who loves this person enough to listen to all this edgelord venting and to act on it, so she probably does care a lot about him. So maybe she does let him go because she can't kill him, and she's like, let me never see you again. And then he escapes or whatever. I know if you don't want that melodrama of it, but I don't know. Why not, man? Like,
it can be melodramatic, but I also think like now at this point now where he's like, he's realized he's in a very different situation, and she's all of a sudden now this empress type character. I kind of am like where he's basically being like, I have to get out of here, like I can't, and then she lets him go, but she's still she's still trying to convert him. Still, it's not like I hate you or I hate you. We're enemies now. It's like she's still. Even as we maybe even get into the second book, there's still within the first act this idea of like, maybe I can convince him, like, you're not wrong, we can do better, all these other things.
That's what I was thinking too.
He's like, I can't get these murders out of my head. That's flat out wrong. And but I still have feelings for you, and we can make it complicated.
And it's complicated. Yeah.
And
it's interesting because of that complication, and who knows where it goes in the next couple books. Yeah, I love that, Charles. That's a great. I think I was trying to circle around that, but you put it to words in a way that made a lot more sense.
Thank you.
If it comes from this, because it's easy to think of this scene of like,
maybe they try to make it work.
Kill you because
maybe they
who knows where it goes.
Try and get back together for a little bit. Who knows? Because like maybe they're not just going to become full on enemies, but they are on opposite sides of this war. So I think I think we did it. I think we did it. We did it.
Yeah.
So we've done it. We've outlined a story, The Throne of the Empire. It's our first space opera.
Yeah. I'm happy about that. Yeah. We're big fans of Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. So we love a good space opera or space fantasy. And I think, I don't know, I guess it's weird to say that after outlining it yourself, but I'd be interested if a writer, if Brian K. Vaughan was interested in something like this, and Fiona Staples is illustrating it for a comic series. Yeah. Could you imagine how Fiona Staples would illustrate some of those like horror scenes?
I can only.
I don't know. I kind of like it as a comic.
Yeah, it would be a cool comic. I agree. Actually, it has legs as a comic.
Sana Takeda could probably do it really well too, from Monstrous. Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda, like those. Sana Takeda does great illustrations of these like horrific things that I think of a little bit more than I do with Saga, but I mean, comics, Charles,
comics,
space opera, space fantasy comics. That's the kind of stuff that you might get out of friends creating fantasy. Now we just have to, who's gonna email Sana Takeda? I don't know, but.
Well, we'll float the treatment by them and see if they're interested.
Yes, that sounds like a plan. So, which we will not actually
No,
for the record.
no, they're too busy coming up with their own ideas that are absolutely
Yes,
brilliant, so they don't need our help with that.
that's fair.
Well, I think, does that just leave us with that? I mean, I think we've done it, right? We've outlined the story, thrown the throne of the empire, and I think all that's left is the sweet, sweet outro music.
Oh, you don't want to do the popcorn thing?
We could
They get it.
do we do the?
It'd be quick.
Okay, let's do the popcorn thing really quickly. So, that's true. Let's do it. So we've got the Throne of the Empire, a space opera, potentially graphic novel, comic book series, starring an edge lord knight a la Anakin, who is part of this knight, society order, and it's a bit of an edgelord assigned to be the bodyguard of a corrupt princess. And the story starts where they have already formed a romantic relationship, and this edgelord knight is just kind of complaining about his job.
Yeah, just venting to our princess character who they're already in a relationship at the start of the story, and there are things that he's sort of right about, but the way he's expressing it is as an edgelord might, a little bit more intense than is probably reasonable. And she legitimately cares about him. She's legitimately listening, offering empathy, trying to take all this stuff in, and she's starting to realize, Charles, that the things he's venting about, he kind of has a point. And she's trying to think, hey, I'm a princess, I have some power, what can I do about this?
And it may have started off with like, oh, a meaningless work job, like a meaningless order was rescinded. Oh, that annoying boss that is kind of misguided and giving you a hard time has disappeared. And oh, I don't care where he's gone. I hope he stays gone. Because I'm the edgelord guy and I'm in charge. And these things start to continue. Start to continue.
They escalate.
They escalate.
They start with this idea of, oh, work assignment I was complaining about that I didn't want to do gets canceled. And that's not too bad. That's actually maybe fine. And then later, this sort of villainous character does disappear, and and our Anakin equivalent protagonist was saying, oh, I wish they would just disappear. And we don't know yet what happened, but he's kind of like, I don't know, he probably just went off somewhere, and it's not that big a deal. So then, we get this, and the whole time, the princess is listening to all these complaints about this larger Jedi Order equivalent type thing and all the issues with it. And most of them are exaggerated, but true. And also ways in which this Jedi Order equivalent control her own parents and the emperors who have maybe grown kind of complacent and are letting this Jedi Order equivalent rule.
Yes, and this works its way up to the princess is like, hey, edgelord knights, like have you considered, like, oh, the knights are wrong, like they're becoming too bureaucratic, they've lost their way, they're no longer noble, they're no longer unbiased, they're like straight up politicians and like warlord general types, and my parents are letting it happen. And that kind of philosophy is what leads her to actually staging the execution of her parents and the ascension to her throne. But she does that in a very dramatic way.
Yes, and I think that our protagonist this whole time is convinced, because of some sort of misinterpretation of a prophecy, that it's just his wishes becoming reality and things like that. He doesn't realize to the extent to which he's influencing his partner into doing these things. And he stumbles upon the mutilated dead body of that third, more villainous character in the Jedi Order. And that's a pretty brutal scene. And that's when then he's invited to attend this viewing of her basically staging the death of her parents while she attempts to logically convey her point to our protagonist, who's realizing as he's listening to her that maybe he went too far with his edgelordiness, and it's probably his fault that this has all gone awry to the point. Of course, the princess is responsible in part too, but our protagonist realizes his role and why his edgelordiness led to this in part.
That's true, and that brings us to the end of book 1 or part 1 or volume 1, however we'll do it in the graphic novel
with
world.
That moment of her trying to tell him to join.
Yes, where she's trying to get into like, hey, you could be the commander of the army, I can be the empress, and together we can, enact a change that we've been talking about for so long. And then he's like, change is one thing, but murdering people and becoming the bureaucratic, like, cold-hearted politician is another, and like all this murder that you're planning to do, you're talking about starting a war, you're talking about killing all my colleagues, blah blah blah, and they part ways, and that brings them into this very complicated relationship and now they're at opposite ends of a war, and that's how the story leaves us.
But we'll save that for book 2, Charles.
Yes, volume 2, probably.
Oh, yes, because it is potentially a comic series.
And that's it, guys. The Throne of the Empire. I think we've done it.
Yeah,
another FCF in the books.
Nice.
All right, I guess that leaves us with nothing else to do but to get into that sweet, sweet outro.
Sweet, sweet outro music. Let's get pumping.
Here we go. Thank you, everyone, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, give us a follow over on Twitter at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. And we're also over out on Instagram at the FTF Podcast. And Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more, and they just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast.
Yes.
Just find that Friends Talking Fantasy page on the Apple Podcast app. You want to click on that Friends Talking Fantasy page, scroll down past any of those episodes you're seeing until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, the optimal number of those to click if you want to support the show would be 5 of them. If you have a little bit of extra time, then writing a review can be even more helpful for a podcast like ours. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for listening to Charles and I ramble about some sort of weird Star Wars subversion. I don't know.
Thank you guys for listening to us get weird with these Friends Creating Fantasy episodes. We appreciate the support. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.